This video is all about painting a cool fantasy image from scratch, so let's break down the process. I had this idea of a character removing some sort of huge obstacle from their path, not with bare hands, but like with magic spell or some sort of force field just to make it interesting. Usually, in order to put my rough ideas on paper, I start with a line work sketch, pretty simple one, roughly pinning down all the main elements, these rock formations, for example, our character, and so on. You don't have to stress yourself too much about the quality of this initial sketch. It's gonna be painted over anyway, but you wanna make sure that you have the fundamentals working out for you. So perspective, some basic anatomy, all those things have to work out. As soon as you're okay with the composition, we can continue with the painting process. And I'm starting by blocking in all these shapes we defined while sketching in the beginning. Oftentimes you may find that the easiest way is to go ahead and put some paint on the sky, on the background, sort of establish the initial color of the sky and maybe hint at what kind of mood you're going for. And then the same thing for all the other elements. Now, this stage is really important because you want to get a feel for the values. This doesn't mean that everything has to be super accurate right now in the beginning, but instead you're slowly establishing a relation between the planes of the image. How light is the background, middle ground, and foreground? So right now you can see me adjusting those values with the curve tool, a pretty standard tool available in all the softwares, and I just want to darken the values I initially picked. And it's all about this comparison between, for example, the mountain and the ground, and then the sky, and so on. So you have to think how readable is everything and if the composition works as intended. And of course you don't have to worry about all this information all by yourself, and instead you should use reference images and extract all the needed information from there. Change it and adapt it according to your needs. For example, before starting, I had prepared images with cosplayers with fantasy clothing and capes and how the capes behaved in the wind. Also maybe a few images of some arid environments that would probably work out as well. This will be very helpful in your journey. Always work with references. Once you've established the values a bit better and the shapes are all blocked in, you can continue by adding some information about the form. And that basically means deciding what kind of lighting you have in the scene and start defining the areas that are in the shadow. You can see I also sketched a bit where I want the cracks to be in the rock, which side of the mountain will be a little bit darker. And in general, when you think about it, all these decisions have to serve your composition. And that is really important. It doesn't matter how much of a fancy light and shadow design you have, if it's too noisy, creates too much contrast everywhere, and your focal point is not readable, then the whole image just doesn't work. I've worked a bit on the textures of the rocks, I kept everything in the same value range, and now I'm trying to set dress the ground a bit, by adding some patches of grass here and there, and maybe a few more bits and pieces from the boulders that are being lifted. Now it would be a really good time to kind of describe what's happening a little bit better, so I'm trying to indicate a gust of wind or some force coming from the ground and hitting the boulders. You can pick a texture brush that doesn't have super hard edges, also maybe a little bit of a thinner flow. Start glazing with it and indicate where you want those gusts of winds to be. A few more solid bits of rock to just show how it literally blasts from the ground up, creating a really strong push. This part right now is really enjoyable. You don't have to deal with any strict shapes you have to perfect or worry about perspective. Instead, just paint special effects with various soft brushes and some scattered shapes. It is important to show the boulders being lifted and not the opposite, like they're falling down. That's why it helps to indicate those bits of rocks being sort of ripped off from the ground and giving us a bit of direction. Since the lighting is top down mostly, you can decide which pieces are in the shadow and which ones are in the open, so a little bit lighter. Now, about the level of detail, how much time you should spend on detailing is completely up to you. I personally prefer not to stay for too long in one spot because I might lose track of the whole image and kind of create a few inconsistencies. Another thing is that as soon as I feel that the statement of the composition is achieved, I don't have to add more and more detailed information. Of course, if it's not serving any purpose. The goal of this type of paintings, for me at least, is to have a quick 2-hour or so process and explore various compositions and really be a bit loose with the brush strokes. Notice that even at this step in the process, I'm still comparing and adjusting values. I want to make sure that everything is readable and has a nice flow. Also, I felt that the background could have a bit more chroma, and I punched in a bit of color saturation and made it a bit lighter as well in some areas. Same with the rocks, I wanted to highlight some of the planes just to add a little bit more value contrast. After spending the majority of time on our environment, it's time to get back to the character and finally describe forms and add some details. And we start by defining the cape a little better, how it's folding, where are the shadows, and how it is lit. Now, the cape is quite close to the camera, so you want to make sure that it is interesting enough. I'm adding some color variation, trying to define the shape a little better, but at the same time, I try to steer away from over-detailing. Rest of the elements are next, the back, claws, and all the rest. If you struggle with the folds, a great help would be to have the reference images, of course, goes without saying, so yeah, make sure you use those, although it's not like I have a complex thing here, but normally I would study the reference before committing to something. So now a bit more fun with the special effects. We've shown the rocks up until now, but no connection with any magical spell or something like that. First, let's add some dust and kind of show that force around our character, sprinkle some particles in the and then complement everything with some glowing special effects, but not before showing that the cape is a bit blurry from the gusts of air, so just an illusion to show that it's moving really fast. Last but not least, we will add some final details, perhaps some edge variation, maybe sharpen the image a bit to get that crisp look. Alright, that would be it for now. Here is the final image. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing, it helps a ton, and I hope to see you all in the next one.